Oh, yes. Oh, yes. Oh, yes. This is episode number 11 of the Midlife Crisis Podcast. My name is Jim Whelan here at Chops Sports Family Network in Manawan, New Jersey. Dave Sergio is here. Find him on social media at Chop Sports. If you like wrestling, you like Cowboys football, you're in the right place. Uh, Also, follow me on Facebook at Midlife Crisis Podcast. Also on X and Instagram at Whalebones with a Z. Growing up, in the 90s, you listen to sports radio. Mike and the Mad Dog in the New York City area was always big. Sometimes they come up with different topics. You talk about sports, or if you're in a local bar, you talk about sports, and then you hear about different things going on. I'm a student of history. I came across a television program, and it talked about Eisenhower meeting aliens. So I said, let me do a little more research on this. I reached out to an author. He was willing to come by. Oppenheimer is a big film coming up in the award season with the Oscars and everything. I was also a military history. I read a lot of books on military, and hearing about Eisenhower meeting with aliens back in 1954 as he was president. World War II, the Foo Fighters was a name that they had with planes that they would see. You know, UFOs in there, and Dave Grohl named his band after the Foo Fighters, which is popular in the 90s. So we're coming up to the 70th anniversary of a summit where Eisenhower met with aliens out at Muroc Air Force Base, also called as Edwards Air Force Base. Dave Sturchio is probably cancel my show and probably throw me out of the building after this episode. But my next guest wrote a book on this topic. He wrote about two books, one about Dwight Eisenhower's Close Encounters, and also about Jackie Gleason and Richard Nixon and their UFO encounters. I'd like to introduce you, Paul Blake Smith, Kansas City fan and UFO enthusiast. I said you said you don't know anything about basketball. I don't know anything about UFOs, so hopefully we can learn something from each other. But I know that there was a basketball team that coming home in Missouri, they did see an alien in Missouri. Do you know anything about that? I think I saw that somewhere
Was
from
that like
practice.
the old Piedmont, Missouri?
Yeah, that sounds
Yeah.
sounds about right. That sounds about right. Well, let's dive into I listened to your book with Dwight Eisenhower. You have it in the back, Close Encounters. First of all, the detail was incredible. If you were presenting the case, I think that the case would have been, really solid. I mean, there's a lot of, and I know there's a lot you put in early, a lot of versions and everything else. But I mean, you really did your research. It really was detailed. I was listening to and from work. This is not my job. I do have a job, but and you make a pretty good argument. Let's talk about a little bit about Dwight Eisenhower. He was golfer. You mentioned he was the first aviator president. Just talk about Eisenhower and how about his introduction to UFOs and what do you think his what he knew? What did he know? When did he know it? So.
Yeah, I was surprised by a few things about Eisenhower. He was a big football player and a football fan, and he was an avid golfer. And that kind of comes in later in our story. But as he grew up, he was obsessed with the military. And to my surprise, he joined the army against his mother's wishes. She was a pacifist, and he never saw battle. He was never in combat, never fired a shot at anyone, I don't think. He was really good at strategy and logistics and planning. So they used Dwight Eisenhower in that mode for the First World War, but mostly the Second World War. And President Roosevelt selected him above like 40 other candidates to run the war. And he did so expertly. They wiped out the Nazi war machine, which everyone thought was invincible in Europe. And Eisenhower became a national hero. When he came home, they threw him a ticker tape parade as the supreme Allied commander. Everyone loved Eisenhower.
Yeah.
Lots of Democrats voted for him, and he won in a landslide in 52 and took office in January of 53. And as I point out in my book, he was obsessed with golf so much he would take golf vacations over and over, like a couple dozen times, to Augusta National Golf Course in Georgia,
Yeah.
near the South Carolina border. And so much that they named a cabin out there. They built him a house on one of the greens and named it the Eisenhower home. And they named a tree after him because he always complained about hitting around this tree. So for some reason, Eisenhower decided he had to go golfing again just after a vacation in Georgia, but all the way 2,700 miles away in Palm Springs, California. Now, why in the world would a president need to go all the way out there to play golf for a few days? Well, we start to find out, as I put in my book, just as much anecdotal or circumstantial evidence as I can to make a really good case, because I don't have access to the top secret files, that Eisenhower set this up in advance to give him a pretext for being in the area. It was right close to Edwards Air Force Base, the most high-tech air and space program we had was out there. And he went out one night without the press knowing. They were distracted by a party going on in a hotel in Palm Springs. So Eisenhower flew out in the cover of darkness to Edwards Air Force Base. And there he met some VIP visitors on the tarmac near an open hangar. He was inside the hangar, according to an eyewitness who was there, surrounded by 6 bodyguards and a U.S. Air Force test pilot who knew a great deal about aerodynamics and flight. What had come in earlier in the afternoon was apparently through a prearranged high-frequency radio communication program, visitors from another world. They were said to be human-like, just like us, only a little misshapen, according to the Air Force test pilot. They came down in 5 craft, 3 circular, 2 elongated, and they were quite peaceful and friendly. They were unarmed. They were met by a welcoming committee that first had to check them out, make sure it was safe. And when they did, they called the president and said, "Come on down." So he did, and he was careful, but he had this meeting filmed. And there were apparently 2 film cameras, one black and white and one in color, in that air base hangar. And it was obviously open, and the aliens stepped out of their ships quite calm and peaceful and friendly. And I don't know if they ever got close enough to touch, or to shake hands. But Eisenhower said, "We welcome you to Earth." And they spoke English, according to the test pilot who was there. And they seemed quite friendly, and they expressed their concern for America's nuclear test detonation program. We were setting off atomic bombs like crazy back then. And we were kind of like reckless children playing with matches and gasoline, frankly, in those days. And we were setting off all of this atomic weaponry with great radiation that we underestimated in the land, in the sea, and in the air. So this would have been a pretty valid excuse, I think, for aliens to sit down and say, we want to talk to your leader face to face about this. You're endangering the planet. On top of all the other pollution we were just pouring in through factories and smokestacks and vehicle exhaust and other things back in those days. If you've ever seen pictures of the 1940s and 50s, a lot of major cities were just covered with like this black soot on the buildings. It was awful.
Well, like the 3 rivers, I think it caught on fire in Pittsburgh because there's so much pollution.
The river caught on fire.
So I mean that's a great story. Listen, we're talking. I'm living in New Jersey, so I know pollution well, I guess you'd say.
Yeah,
but
and I think in Cleveland, the river caught on fire. There was so much poison we're putting in to the land and the sea and the rivers and all that stuff.
So I mean, I got interested in this topic because we're coming up to the 70th anniversary of this meeting. I guess it's February 19th. I think it was 1954 that they had the meeting. So and then you alluded in the book 10 years prior, Eisenhower met with Churchill, and I know like the Foo Fighters, the band of Foo Fighters, that was always like a phenomenon. And I heard Dave Grohl talk about the Foo Fighters and where they got the name from. I guess it was probably World War II was probably one of the first aviation eras. You had you had a lot of air campaigns, and then they had some interactions with these Foo Fighters. So what happened in 1944 with Eisenhower and Churchill in that meeting? You alluded a little bit in that.
A few years ago, there was a man who came forward and said, "My grandfather was an RAF pilot who was used as a bodyguard for Winston Churchill." And he told an amazing story that Eisenhower and Churchill met and openly discussed in front of a few people, including the bodyguard, all these UFO sightings. Only in those days, as you mentioned, they would call them Foo Fighters, orbs, daylight discs, whatever. It was a new phenomenon. And they were buzzing in and around our Allied fighters and bomber planes and such during the war. So one particular case, a very good-sized UFO that was buzzing around, I believe, a bomber plane, and everyone was really worried about it. And Eisenhower met with Churchill, and they discussed it and said, we better keep the lid on this. People might have their faith shaken in the course of human events, their religious faith, their education. For now, let's just cover this up and say nothing. And the bodyguard reported this in a letter some years later that he heard this and he swears the story is true. And that was an early indication that Eisenhower felt it best that the American public not learn of these things, that we're not ready for this, in his opinion. And I don't know, he might have been right back then.
Well, that's what I was going to ask you, your personal opinion, because I think, and you alluded to in the book, like the aliens said, I guess they were going to have like a clean offer Eisenhower clean gas and also reveal themselves. But Eisenhower, that's the 54 meeting, thought that, the world wasn't ready for that. I mean, do you agree with that from doing all your research?
It's a tough call. He didn't want to disrupt the economy and cause a stock market crash. But supposedly, one eyewitness said the aliens offered a clean energy system, and it would have to replace all of our energy systems in your homes, in your cars, and factories and everything. And Eisenhower was a very conservative man. He actually got baptized, the first president to be baptized in his first month in office. He was a hardcore Christian, a very religious churchgoer.
Yeah.
So he wasn't too prone for a lot of change.
Yeah.
And nobody wanted to be the president to set off a possible stock market crash and unemployment. So he wasn't too keen on that idea.
Yeah, well,
we're kicking ourselves ever since.
Yeah. Well, I mean, one thing I have to say is like, well, how come they never came back and offered that? You hear about like I grew up in the 80s. They said we're going to be out of oil, and next thing you know, here it is, 40 years later, we're still driving oil cars. So I mean,
could you come back and make an offer again?
Yeah, exactly. We'll bring you back, but well, Eisenhower decides he gets some information from Truman. I think when he was looking at, because I don't think he really renounced that he alluded in his book that he was a Republican until later on. But then he had a moment when I guess he decided to run for president. He was on an aircraft carrier somewhere in the Pacific. And I think that's where he had his first interaction with the.
He was off the coast of France inspecting our military readiness for President Truman. He was still General Eisenhower back in those days in January 52. And as soon as he got back, he decided, I'm going to announce for president. But anyway, while aboard this ship, according to an eyewitness who was there and wrote an article in a New York City newspaper, I think in 1997, Eisenhower was trying to sleep during a violent storm on this ship, the USS Franklin Roosevelt, which had, I think, nuclear weapons aboard. And it was a nasty, stormy night. And Eisenhower came up on the bridge looking for coffee because he couldn't sleep. And it was thundering, lightning, high winds, and choppy waves. And while they were standing around talking in the bridge, they saw this disc, this lit up disc hovering over the ship. And it didn't really move too much. And they all just stood there looking at it. I don't know if anyone got any footage or grabbed a camera. They were all astounded, and it said that the disc did not seem particularly affected by the storm. It hovered in place quite peacefully for about 10 minutes at least. And so, this wasn't a fleeting glimpse. This is something that just hung there and obviously wanted his attention, and he gave it to them. And according to the naval officer who was there and wrote the article, Eisenhower said as soon as it zipped away, that, I'll look into this, boys, and you keep it under your hat for now. And he said, we never heard back from him. So, so the officer wanted to write that story and get it out before he passed away, because that was 1952. And by the late 1990s, he was getting on. So that's another similar story to the test pilot who spoke out in the early 1980s. And he said, everyone from the encounter that night in 54 is dead, and I'm the last person, and I don't want this story to die out. So he told it. tried to keep his true identity anonymous so he wouldn't lose his pension, his health care plan, have anyone bothering him, and so it's just an astounding, exciting story, a U.S. president meeting with human-like extraterrestrials.
Yeah, well, I mean, it's great. I guess you started out your book. I guess it's what was it? You said it was best story never told. I guess
Yeah,
like that. Yeah, it was
it's like the greatest story you've never really heard.
You never really
And,
heard. So,
according to one eyewitness, the Vatican has the film footage. They've got a man named Cristoforo Barbato reports on the Vatican, and he had a source that took him aside and said, "We've seen the footage. There's black and white, and there's color film footage of Eisenhower greeting these human-like beings." And he said they put on an air show for him. They wanted to show what they could do. And as the crafts were buzzing back and forth and flying around over the tarmac and the runway at Edwards, it shorted out one of the black and white cameras, so that the film abruptly stops, but the color film went all the way. Recently, there was a film called The 11th Green that tried to recreate this, and the advertising shows two cameramen operating like newsreel cameras on either side, capturing this event. So it would be awesome if somebody were to leak that footage, wouldn't it?
Well,
blow that story wide open.
I guess you always complain of Vatican; they have all the good stuff. So
yeah. Well, there was supposedly the Archbishop of the West Coast of America was called in at one point. They wanted to start getting opinions from other people about these friendly aliens, and how do we handle telling the American people this, or should we keep it covered up? And one of the factors that scared Eisenhower, as you read in the book, is allegedly the alien visitors could cloak themselves, make themselves appear invisible, which is technology we're just now getting a bit of a grip on and starting to have some success with. But they knew how to make themselves invisible to the naked eye and then reappear somewhere else. And so this had to have been very, very disconcerting to a conservative leader like Eisenhower, who ultimately told them, "You're going to have to go. Our world isn't ready for this." And so where we stand with these particular species, this race, today, I don't know.
Yeah, well, I think Harry Reid, when that funding came out about cloaking, everybody's like, "What is he, crazy?" I think Harry Reid proposed that legislation. I think I heard in the news. So, but getting back to the 54 summit, he didn't really accept anything from him, but you alluded to in the book that he did allow them almost like safe passage to a certain area to do some research. Is that correct?
Yeah, according to a document leaked in 2017 from the Defense Intelligence Agency, an agreement was forged between Eisenhower and the extraterrestrials. And the ETs wanted a quiet place to sit down and do some research where we would monitor them. And they selected an air base out in the Nevada desert. And we would agree to bring them like plant and animal specimens, and they would bring some technology to us. What exactly, that consists of, I don't know to this day, but we've certainly had an explosion in technological advances since that time. This was a 1989 document leaked in 2017, and it made clear that not only did Eisenhower have this meeting, he had two more with them. One at Holloman Air Force Base, maybe two of them in 1955. So I looked up those dates, and you cross-reference with Eisenhower's digitized presidential records, and by golly, it does align where this could have happened. Obviously, he's not going to leave it in there. I met with aliens on this date.
Exactly.
Leave the evidence behind. This would have been super top secret stuff. But the dates do align with openings in his schedule.
And then you also alluded to it earlier in the interview about the hydrogen bomb and the Bikini Islands. It was 200 times or 2,000 times greater than the atom bomb. And I think he met with them in February, and he dropped the bombs as test bombs and basically devastated the Bikini Islands. And that was a couple months after. Do you think they were forewarning them, like you're kind of playing with fire here with this?
I think so. That they knew from monitoring us somehow that we were not fully grasping the power and the radiation and the deadly chemicals that were coming from all blasts. But as you mentioned, this was called Castle Bravo. It was an enormous explosion, way bigger than what our scientists thought they were going to do when they triggered this thing in Bikini Atoll in the Pacific. I've also learned that there was a UFO sighting around that detonation, which is very interesting. Might have been the same race or maybe another one. So it led to a big mess in 54 weeks, or like about 10 days after the Eisenhower encounter at Edwards Air Force Base, where they asked, could you stop, your atomic bomb program? And Eisenhower told the aliens, I'm not going to disarm unilaterally, and not until I find out other nations, like Russia or China or England would be willing to stop building them and test detonating. So this led to the atomic weapon program continuing at least for the next few months.
And then you mentioned a little bit about the Blue Book. What exactly is the Blue Book?
Project Blue Book?
Your Project Blue Book, yes.
Yeah, that was begun, I think, under Eisenhower, and it was the U.S. Air Force had a very great interest in UFO sightings, and they would send representatives to look into this. What they released to the public after they closed Project Blue Book in late 1969 under President Nixon was the most obvious cases that this was easily disproven in that. But a number of sources said the most juicy, easily extraterrestrial cases were not included in Project Blue Book. They just cut them out and let the public think, well, there's nothing. It's all explainable. They just didn't want a panic to happen. Nobody wants people quitting their jobs, quitting school, quitting churches, leaving their families to go off in search of aliens or find out where the landing is and wanting to talk to them, or, going a little loopy, as we've seen some people kind of go overboard in our society on various things. Yeah.
Like everything else. I mean, and there was one memo you referred to. The memo escapes me. The one memo, it was a M something or other.
The MJ-12 committee.
MJ.
The Cutler-Twining memo is kind of famous in UFO research circles. I didn't want to spend a whole lot of time on it, but it claimed to back up the idea of the MJ-12 committee by having, according to this document found, I think in the 1980s, it claimed that President Eisenhower would meet with the U.S. Air Force head officer Nathan Twining, General Twining, who later became chairman of the Joint Chiefs of Staff. And I looked up in Mr. Eisenhower's records, and by golly, Twining did show up on that date for lunch hour with Mr. Eisenhower. So I think there could be some credence to that famous document.
Well, like I said, your detail in the book is really, there's a lot there. But and then you also lean a little bit on the Georgia Sixes, the 6 state troopers that you're saying allegedly was in Augusta, and then that they ended up escorting them to Edwards Air Force Base. I guess it was also called Muroc Air Force Base.
Right.
So
it was out in the California desert. If you were picking a site to meet aliens, you couldn't have done any better than way out in the desert, away from any small town. Edwards Air Force Base was not all that well built up, but it was surrounded by mountains and acres, miles and miles of dry lake bed where we tested our top jet planes and such. And we had our science and technology division based out there for aerodynamics and flight. So if you wanted experts to look over a craft, and there is one rumor I included in the book that they did gift us a craft, and that these Eisenhower did allow some of his bodyguards to pick the darn thing up. It was really lightweight. They handled it like it was nothing. I don't know if they tossed it in the air, but that's one story that came out of this that I wanted to include, that we may have been given this gift to look over at our discretion.
And now, is any other countries privy to? I mean, was there any other? You just talk about Eisenhower in our country. Do you know of any other interactions, any world leaders at the time?
Yeah, it's a very good question, and I don't know that much. In England, there's a man who said he was near Lord Mountbatten's estate out in the country, and there was this craft, very similar, a circular silver disc with like tripod legs, just resting on the lawn of his property.
Yeah.
And it is said that Lord Mountbatten privately had a very great interest in UFOs, and so did Prince Philip, who was like his best friend in the
Yeah.
royal family. He just passed on a year or so ago, and
Sure.
my publishers tried to send a copy of our book there to Prince Philip, and he died like a month later. So I
Yeah.
don't know if he ever got a hold of it. But according to many experts, Prince Philip had a tremendous interest and a huge private UFO book collection, and no one ever seems to dispute this. So that could have been one nation that, if they met in private out in the countryside with a member of the royal family or someone from Parliament, it's possible. Whether they went to Russia or China, these human-like aliens, I simply don't know.
Yeah. And then you also mentioned talking a little about Cespedes. You said that was kind of almost like based on ET, the alien, I guess that survived, and kind of like it was. You thought that might have been like what the ET movie was based on.
Yeah, Spielberg told a story that he was filming, or he was showing his film E.T. in the summer of '82 to President Reagan, and after it was over, this wild rumor went around for years that Reagan turned to him and said, "You know, you don't know how true this story is. The story of E.T. the extraterrestrial."
Yeah.
Well, just a few years ago, Spielberg broke down and said that story is true.
Oh,
Reagan
okay.
said that without smiling to me at that screening. He said there were astronauts there present. He says, "You don't know how many people in this room know that story is true."
Well, because
So, yeah,
you alluded to that in your book. You go. I mean, one thing. It's almost like a good presidential historical book too, because Reagan was the governor of California at the time,
right.
and then and was friendly with Eisenhower. So
Yeah.
it just
Reagan was inaugurated, I think, in '67, and
right.
he would not have been in power. He was an actor back in '54.
Okay.
But I hope you saw the point, and I'll just raise it on my own, that exactly 10 years to the day of the Eisenhower encounter, the President of the United States, Lyndon B. Johnson, just happens to get on the phone to Eisenhower, fly all the way across the country, and meet with Eisenhower in private. There were some gaps in their schedule where they could have gone to an Air Force base or something, and a source that claims there was like a presidential UFO visit or an encounter in '64, a scientist named Edward Moraine. So maybe Johnson had to go out and consult with Eisenhower, who was in retirement in Palm Springs in those days, and talk about this agreement that he worked on. If it was a 10-year agreement, should they renew it? And what's the latest? So that's a possibility that I put in my book. I find it so hard to think that this is just pure coincidence that on the exact 10-year anniversary, you got to fly all the way across the country and huddle with Dwight Eisenhower.
Yeah, because you also alluded about Kennedy. Kennedy was, I guess, with the moon landing, he funded the space program. So, unfortunately, he got assassinated. Johnson took over. And then you said about the 64 mention. And then you move on to Nixon, who was Eisenhower's VP. Obviously, he lost to Kennedy in 60. But, and tell me about if he had any interactions or what, I think 73, there was
Right.
something.
On the exact anniversary date, here it is again, February 19th, 1973. Jackie Gleason's ex-wife said he came home ashen face, all shook up. And she said, "What happened to you? Where have you been?" And he said, "I've been at an Air Force base with the President of the United States, Richard Nixon, and he showed me the hard proof. We've got bodies."
Yeah.
He may have been shown a craft as well. It makes a great sequel, as you can see, to my Eisenhower book, because Nixon was Eisenhower's vice president for 8 long years, and he wanted power, and he achieved it in '68. And Jackie probably bugged him all the time. Boy, I'm hidden by the sunlight here.
Yeah.
Where'd I go? There I
There
am.
you go. There you go. Yeah. Yeah.
That
I thought you might have gotten beamed up somewhere.
I'm being
The interview was
taken
starting
aboard
to
the
get older.
spaceship
So,
myself.
yeah. So,
So it turns out Gleason and Nixon were old friends who were golfing all the time and talked about things in private. And I'm sure Gleason, who was so obsessed with the paranormal and UFOs, asked him over and over. And finally, Nixon relented and showed him just a few days before Jackie's birthday in February of '73. I don't think it's a coincidence that it was on the exact anniversary date. I think Mr. Nixon had to be there at an Air Force base regarding this treaty. That's my speculation or hypothesis. So he just took along Jackie and decided, what the heck, let's give this guy what he wants. Let him see some bodies, as long as he promises not to talk about it.
Yeah, and I think that, talk about Jackie Gleason. I mean, I know him from the Honeymooners. New Year's Day, they always have the Honeymooner Marathon.
Yeah.
And it's just, out of all the people that think that would be friends and somebody would be interested in UFOs, Jackie Gleason, but he was into it. I guess he had an extensive library. He had a house up in Westchester. It was like almost like a pill shape that it almost looked like a spaceship.
Yeah, he built custom built, had it built in an airplane hangar, and then shipped to his site on the edge of a bluff in Westchester County outside of New York City to make it look like you're flying in a UFO, and with these big bay windows. And he filled it with like a Tesla coil, telescopes. He was obsessed with UFOs. He wanted to feel like he was living in one. I don't think he lived in it too much. According to an article I read, he would actually sleep in a house next door. But this big circular house was like his fantasy house that he paid like $1 million for. And for Jackie, he was super wealthy. He earned up to $14 million a year, which was an enormous sum in the 50s and 60s.
That's huge.
So he would call up UFO eyewitnesses and UFO authors and quiz them over every last detail about what they saw. He was so obsessed with that story, with that subject.
And he was down in Miami. So I guess these bodies were taken at you alluded to in the book at Homestead Air Force Base, which is
right,
down there. So I guess it was in driving distance. So
yeah, Jackie sold his UFO house to CBS in '64 and moved lock, stock, and barrel to Miami so he could be in warmer weather to golf every day.
Yeah,
and he said, if you don't like it, don't hire me, but I'm going. So they moved the entire cast and crew and production of the Jackie Gleason show to the Miami theater, and he could just drive there back and forth every day. And he would say, Miami audiences are the greatest audiences in the world. And he had a home custom built on a golf course, and he hosted his own CBS golf tournament with celebrities and pro golfers. And that's what Nixon showed up on February 19th, 1973. I've got the newspaper articles on that address by Nixon. He sat down on the golf course in a helipad, and he got out, and Jackie picked him up in an electric golf cart and took him over to meet the press. And the two were good pals, and then Nixon took off. And I believe it is later that night, Nixon sent back his helicopter and picked Jackie up so he wouldn't have to drive. Nixon and Gleason were both lousy drivers who liked to tipple a little during the evening, but they didn't have to drive, either one of them. Nixon had a helipad behind his Key Biscayne home, and Jackie had a helipad on the golf course right near his house. So all they had to do was take about a 15-20-minute flight to Homestead Air Force Base, south of Miami. And that's where Jackie said, here's where I was with the president. And he showed me these bodies in a kind of secluded building, a laboratory of sorts, and that they were these small little gray aliens with big pointy ears and big bug eyes. And he was just flabbergasted. He finally got his wish come true. And Nixon was his good pal. And what did he do? He blabbed about it as soon as he got home. I'm sure they told him, don't talk about this. But his wife demanded, where have you been?
I guess it goes against his Ralph Cramden. You're a blabbermouth, so
Ralph Cramden once came out, on his show. Remember, he came out in a costume and declared, "I am the man from space."
Yeah.
He was so obsessed.
Yeah. But you have that book, Nixon Gleason, Alien Encounter. So that's your second book. How many books have you written on this topic, and how did you get involved in this topic?
On the presidential UFOs, just these two that you see here. But on UFOs, I'm from Cape Girardeau, Missouri. We had a UFO crash in 1941, and I kept waiting for someone to research and write a book on this. So I decided I'll do it. And I did. I made a mistake. I thought it happened on April 12th, 1941. And I find out now that that is not accurate. So I put together a whole new compendium, put everything really solidly together, and my publisher died.
Yeah.
His son came in, folded the whole
Well,
company.
I
Now I
shouldn't
got
be
to find a
laughing,
new,
but yeah.
got to find a new publisher. So
Yeah.
that book
So
is on hold, but it'll be worth it, I tell you.
so how many books have you wrote
Oh,
altogether?
geez, 7, 8, 9. I've written a Christian adventure novel
Hmm.
and a comedy novel, and it did include real life UFO information. I've written one on the JFK assassination, and someone who was very much into that subject but doesn't believe everything gave me a really good review on that book. Uh, but I had a publisher who did almost no advertising, almost no marketing, and I had
Okay.
to do stuff myself. You find that out as a writer, you think, oh, this will be good. I'll write it, and then someone else will market and advertise. No,
Yeah.
you got to get on social media and constantly and on podcasts and make a name for yourself. It's like writing is almost practically
Yeah.
like 30% of the whole process. Yeah.
And then I know you talked a little bit about the Georgia State Troopers. You mentioned that a couple times in the book. And then I didn't know about this, but you said that there was a United States Stonehenge down in Georgia, and then
Yeah.
it had like 10, almost like 10 written things, and I got them
Yeah.
written down here. Maintain humanity under 500 million, perpetual balance with nature, guide reproduction wisely, improving fitness and diversity, unite humanity with a living new language. Uh, rule passion, faith, tradition, and all things with tempered reason. Protect people and nations with fair laws and just courts. Let all nations rule internally, resolving external disputes in world court. Avoid petty laws and useless officials. Balance personal rights with social duties. Prize truth, beauty, love, seeking harmony uh, infinity, and be not a cancer on earth. Leave room for nature. Leave room. Leave room for nature. So it says it twice. It's almost like like somebody would have like a self-help book. So you
Yeah.
alluded to the fact that probably the last trooper wanted to leave like a mark on, like this was like a message. I mean,
Yeah.
you agree? Do we agree with that, or?
Yeah, it's a theory I put forward. Eisenhower was always protected when he went to Augusta dozens and dozens of times by Georgia State Highway Patrol troopers. And I think they were there at the Eisenhower alien encounter in California. I found evidence of that in Eisenhower's presidential records, in which he talked about signing an autograph for this group of Georgia troopers that were out in Palm Springs to guard it at an unspecified event. Well, gee, what could that have been on February 19th, the exact date? So he was used to these troopers. And as their numbers began to dwindle, as the decades went by, someone in 1979 authorized the construction, and he paid for it, of these Georgia Guidestones, this monolith out in the middle of a Georgia cow pasture. It's since been blown up. It's been destroyed, but I'll get to that in a second. But no one knew who this guy was. This man showed up and said, I want to put up this monolith for other people to learn how to correctly or wisely navigate life on Earth. And it almost sounded like guidance from an extraterrestrial, frankly. The guy paid for all of this and he disappeared and he never showed up again. So where did they want to put this guy who's named R.C. Christian? That's what he gave his name as.
Okay.
He wanted it in Augusta, Georgia, of all places. So it makes you think he might have been among that trooper group or a son of the trooper that was guarding Eisenhower, and they learned some things about what the aliens advised us to do and put this monument together. A year or so ago, the thing was vandalized. The Georgia Guidestones were badly damaged, so the local government blew it up with some dynamite and hauled the pieces away, and now they don't know what to do with it. But we've got the record of what it looked like and what it said. So I propose possibly that this was some sort of extraterrestrial advice, if you want to call it, possibly stemming from the 54 encounter.
And then we blew it up. So
yeah,
that's it.
Very nice.
That's what we think about your advice. So we blew it up. So
yeah. Well, did you read what the initial greeting was for the aliens when they came down in 54? According to a sergeant who was there, they opened fire on them at the Air Force base. Remember, the general said, we're open fire on those bogeys. A sergeant said to a UFO investigator, I was working at Edwards Air Force Base when these 5 craft came down, 3 circular, 2 elongated, and the general was there at artillery practice and said, open fire on those ships. And so they tried to shoot them
Yeah.
out of the sky, and their
Yeah.
weapons had no effect whatsoever. And they said they all ceased fire and stared into the sky as these things came down and landed in front of an airplane hangar on the base. So that
Yeah.
story fits in with, our brand of welcome, Matt, or
Yeah.
welcome
Yeah.
to Earth is to
Yeah.
blow it up or shoot at it.
So, I mean, well, listen, I mean, I didn't even get you talk about Roswell in the book. I mean, I don't want to take too much of your time, Paul. And when I knew I had the right person when I found you on Facebook. We were going back and forth, and I sent you something, and I love it. You ever think about a meeting with aliens? It's like, oh yeah, that could happen. So I just found it was very comical, like the banter you have about this, and I thought, I mean, it was pretty interesting. But just being a student of history, hearing about it, and coming up to the 70th anniversary, I thought it might be something that
Yeah.
people might be a little bit intrigued about. But like, if somebody is interested in stuff, or somebody wants to, well, like, what podcasts or what sites would you kind of refer somebody to, just to kind of,
Well, I would certainly refer to read the books from Amazon.com or the audiobooks from Tantor.com. As you heard them, Tom Byer reads them quite well, and they
yes,
did a good job of the audio
yes,
form. And then I have Facebook pages, I have Instagram, I have Twitter. You can find me there if you've got some tips and some information on, like, let's say, the Cape Girardeau UFO crash in Missouri of 41, or more on Eisenhower. I've got a website, and I really need to work on it. It's pretty
yeah,
crummy.
yeah,
I'm embarrassed, but at least I'm being honest. And I will
yeah,
honestly say also, I've never seen a UFO. I've never witnessed anything extraordinary like that. So I'm not going to make anything up. I think your personal honesty and credibility are important. I tried to cram as much information as I could find. As you point out in this interview, there's a lot of data here to chew on,
yeah,
instead of some flimsy story you heard from somebody and you don't do any research. There are
yeah,
books like that is just junk. I don't go for that. I try to make it very much worth your money and worth your time to read, with sources and references and who said what exactly. So I also will go on most any respectable podcasts like
yeah,
yours, Jim. And I
yeah.
sure thank you for having me on.
Well, listen, it's been great. I just want to just leave me 2 things. Like, um, what do you think is going to happen on February 19th, 2024? You think that there's going to be
Boy,
any? You
yeah,
think
that's.
there's going to be? Are you going
I
to
don't know.
prophesy?
We're going to have to keep an eye on, I guess, President Biden, if he's still in office at that time.
Yeah,
Is he going to go on any mysterious trips or disappear?
yeah.
Uh,
Well,
I don't know if there's too many people left in government or in the military who know the whole story now. It's so long ago, so covered up, buried, within files, so that what today's young officers or government officials know is beyond me.
yeah. And then lastly, what's your prediction for the Super Bowl? What do you
Well,
think?
I'm hoping my Chiefs will prevail, but I think this is going to be tough. The 49ers are going to want revenge on 4 years ago. They've got McCaffrey, this beast of a running back. So I heard a broadcaster once say, here's what I tell people when I issue predictions. I predict that the team with the most points at the end of the game will be declared the winner.
Yeah, yeah. So
So that's my prediction, too.
yeah. And what about? I see you got the St. Louis Cardinals banner in the back.
Yeah,
What do you think of
I'm here in Missouri, a baseball Cardinal fan. I don't think we're going to have too good of a team. I'm hopeful the Chiefs will win it all, but I won't be too disappointed. They've been in other Super Bowls. So I'm just looking for good sports entertainment. It's the ultimate reality show. I really enjoy sports, and I hope your program's a big hit.
Yeah, well, thanks, Paul. Thanks for your time. And I mean, were you a Rams fan, and were you always a Chiefs fan? Just
I was also a Rams fan. We lost our
yeah,
team. Don't get
yeah.
me
So
started.
yeah.
Got it
All right.
yanked away. But the Chiefs are always awesome. They're so entertaining, win or
Yeah.
lose.
Well, he's something else. Mahomes is something else. But I mean, and Andy Reid, that play to win the game, like, that pass to
Yeah, late in the
Valdez.
game.
I mean, who'd have, I don't know. They just keep on pulling rabbit, and so. But anyway, but thanks, Paul. Thanks for your time. I really appreciate it. Good luck with the book. Good luck finding a publisher. I hope this episode gives you traction. I know, it was it was fun to listen to your book. I mean, I'm not really into UFOs, but the thing
Yeah.
is just you make it believable. So just putting to that, you give a lot of detailed information in there. So
All right. Well, I thank you for the thumbs up review, and I hope everyone enjoys this show when it comes on, and the book when they go out and get it themselves.
so all right, Paul. Stay well, be well, and good luck in the Super Bowl.
All right. Thank you.
Take care, Paul. Thank you for watching this episode. Hopefully, Paul's finds a publisher. His books do well. Very entertaining topic. Very entertaining individual. Dave said I could still say he liked the episode, so you got a thumbs up from him. But thanks, Paul, and see what happens on February 19, 2024, and see what Joe Biden goes. It's a topic I think it's something to laugh about. But next episode we'll be back to basketball, so you don't have to worry about that. But feel free to follow me on Facebook at Midlife Crisis Podcast, also on Twitter at Whalebones with a Z. Hope you enjoy this episode and look for many more basketball episodes coming up unless we get abducted in 2024. Have a great day.